About and we're off and running. So welcome teachers. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. It is 4 o'clock. We really appreciate your time because you're back at school and college at the moment. First week back from Easter for most of you. And just really appreciate you being able to spend the time with us on a really important matter, prioritising the mental health and well-being of teachers and students. And this is something that came about. Munya, I know, is on the call from Kent, the LEP down there. It came about from a conversation I was having with him around, what can we be doing at Pathway CTM as a society to help support schools and colleges more and help support teachers. I myself used to be a PE teacher just for a couple of years, but the things that you're going through, I think, and the stuff that you've been through lockdown and COVID, let alone young people, let alone those who are disadvantaged with difficult working environments at home. I just thought it'd be really good if I could go out to my employer partners and see what was happening and try and share some best practice with maybe where they've got a bit more resource and a bit more time to be able to focus on this. And I found one of my best partners, PwC, and Sean there, who I'll introduce in a second. And I chatted to Sean, a really nice guy. He's been a teacher. He's credible from that point of view. It's not just a corporate telling us as teachers what to do. He's been there and done it. So I just thought it'd be a really nice environment to be able to share some best practice. But my main aims really are to increase awareness of this topic, have some practical advice and guidance as much as we can, hear from an expert, but also to share experiences as well. And I'll let you into a little secret, throughout the Careers and Enterprise Company, who are supporting this as well, throughout all of our schools and colleges, no school or college came forward feeling confident to be on a webinar to talk about this. I did hear snippets of good examples. However, no one was actually confident enough to go, no, we do this well. So maybe that's a good point to why we're here today. So there we are, event starting at 4. Great click, Chris. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Chris. I'm the founder and CEO of Pathway CTM. We're an employability program, but I'm sure most of you do know what we do because you're on our mailing list probably. But if you're not, we support young people into employment opportunities. So the likes of PwC, they've got sponsored degree programs, degree level apprenticeship programs, the graduate route. They've got work experience. It's about navigating your way through all of that noise potentially to find what company and what program at what time is right for you as a young person. So we've got a mentorship team that support young people throughout that journey. But I'd like to introduce Sean, and like I say, he's ex-teacher, now at PwC, looking after what I think is 22,000 staff at PwC in terms of their mental health. Sean, is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, I will first of all state I'm not a counsellor, I'm not a psychologist. I don't have 23,000 people lining up at the door to come and see me and me to fix their brains. But I lead on what we call our mental health literacy strategy in PwC. Probably to go back, as you said, I was a teacher. I taught for 25 years. I always want to say man and boy, very Harry Enfield-esque at the end of that. Fast show-esque, I should say. And I taught in the southeast, in around Kent and Sussex. I was a head of year. I was an assistant head teacher before I had an opportunity to join PwC and put some of the experience that I gained in pastoral care in schools to supporting our, particularly our young staff as it was, joining the firm. And then that's expanded now in my role. And you mentioned it. We are very, very lucky to be. I'm just spotting that chat there. We're very lucky. We have the resource that we can put in place quite a few resources to support the mental health and the well-being of our staff. Particularly interested in joining this as well. We have a real place and purpose around us at PwC. Yes, we are a bit of a corporate behemoth in many ways, and there is, we are a commercial firm, but we also recognise the need to portray ourselves in the right way, but also to give back. And one of the things that I've been very excited to be doing whilst I'm here, as well as supporting our staff, we're paired up with Bradford City. We have an office there, and we want to do something about social mobility in the Bradford area. And so I'm actually working with delivering mental health awareness training in Bradford schools as well. So yeah, so that's me, and we'll come to a few more bits in a bit.
Great,
I'm
thanks.
certain.
Thank you, Sean. And just in terms of how to communicate, so we've got the chat box, and we've already experienced that. In terms of using the chat box, so a bit of an echo there, and then there's also the Q&A box, and if you could use the Q&A box for any questions that you have, as soon as you think of them, pop them in the Q&A, and I'll make sure that I get through all those questions throughout the session. I might interject, Sean, and make sure that I ask it straight away, or we might just wait until the end, depending on the question and how we're going at the time. You can raise your hand and pop in the chat box if you'd like to speak, and I'll unmute you if you actually want to speak to Sean and have a deep conversation. That's probably better than me asking questions in terms of that, because this is there for you guys. So let me just quickly launch our poll. So hopefully you can see that. It should appear in the middle of your screen. So I'm asking just a few questions here. What best describes you? You might be SLT, governor, teacher, career teacher, sixth form teacher. Hopefully you guys can see that. On a scale of 1 to 5, how confident are you with your school's mental health awareness? Maybe you're not confident at all. Maybe you are confident. It is confidential. We're not going to know what you say for that. Who is more of a concern? Is it students? Is it parents? Sorry, is it teachers? Maybe we should have put parents in there. Both, neither, not sure. And does your establishment, college or school, have an on-site counsellor at the moment? Maybe you have before COVID, maybe you've recently brought that in because of COVID and the extra challenges around this area. Maybe you haven't, or indeed, maybe you're not too sure. So please do pop those in, and we will get to the poll results just about in a second. Just give you an opportunity to try and fill that one in, and I'll just talk through the in fact, I might have to be strict with you here, guys. I'm just going to end the poll there, and I'm going to share results. So we've got 42% are from the sixth form crowd, sixth form teacher, which is fantastic. 25% careers teachers and teachers, and we do have some governors on here as well. On a scale of 1 to 5, how confident are you with your school's mental health awareness? 4, being confident, comes out the strongest there. So that's very, very good and positive. And I suppose you being on this webinar is a representation of that. Who are you most concerned about concerning mental health? Students comes out at 50%, both at 33%, and teachers still does come out at 17%, thinking teachers are more of a concern than students. Maybe all the strains they've had to do with blended learning and working on-site, working off-site. Does your establishment have an on-site counsellor? Yes, they have before COVID at 67%. Yes, recently 25%, and no is only 8%, Sean. So I will leave those results there just for a second. Sean, any comments on those before I start clicking through some of your slides?
I think there we go. I think it's really heartening to see actually the fact that, picking up on that second question, that people do feel confident to talk about mental health, and I think that is something that I've noticed over the I've been at PwC for coming up for 5 years now, and we do similar polls, and you know, the most common answer 5 years ago would be words to the effect of, no, I haven't got a clue. And now we're getting more and more people who are confident. Really useful for me to know for this this particular presentation, because I will admit, you know, we'll talk about anxiety and depression and all those kind of things, and I will feel quite anxious talking to a group of people here where we've got mixed experience. And really grateful for you all filling in that poll, because it allows me to pitch this in the right way, and we will have a real mix, I know, on the call in terms of people and what their schools offer. And I think that's probably the first thing to start out with is, from my perspective, you know, it would be nice to see that we had a little bit more directive from government here, so we could have a more joined up approach towards the support of our young people and our staff in schools. It is still very much, isn't it, open to each and every school to navigate that path in their own way. There are supports, you know, from the LEAs, but it is still very much down to each school how they do that. Objectives there. As an ex-teacher, I realised that reading PowerPoints is intensely irritating, so I won't do that at all. But whilst you're having a look at those, the thing to say here is that this is not, I really, Chris said it, I'm not coming in from a firm like PwC and telling you as an audience what you should do or what you shouldn't do. What I'm hoping to do here, hope it comes across in the right way, is to share what we've done at PwC, and for me, with that teaching experience, if you like, to suggest ways in which some of that may be put to use in your schools. Or it may just simply be the fact that some of you are really well advanced along this path, and actually getting reassurance, if you like, that that some of the things that you're doing, you're putting in place, are the right things to put in place. Would be what you get out of this session as well. So, you know, I'm going to put that there. First recognition that I'm not going to teach everyone something new during this, and I wouldn't want to pretend that I could. I normally, when I tee up this slide, I normally talk about my own experience here, and I'm going to indulge myself a little bit and just give a quick rundown of one of the reasons why I'm so glad. I do feel like I've landed on my feet in the work that I do, because I love teaching, and effectively that's what I do in PwC. Is I deliver training to people pretty much every day. And I do it in a field which I do feel passionately about. And one of my reasons for that is that my dad, unbeknown to me, he's no longer with us. He died a long time ago. But he suffered with a mental health condition. And what we think is that it was PTSD. To describe my dad to all of you, he was a bull of a man. He was a bit shorter than me, so he was just under 6 feet. He had a 44-inch chest, and he had fists that, if I hold mine up to the camera there, they were half as wide. Again, not frightened of anyone or anything, so it appeared. And he joined the Navy in the Second World War. Yes, I am that old, but he was quite old when I was born as well. And in 1941, sorry, he was born in 1922, he had to jump off the side of his ship into some enormous waves, 60-foot waves, because his ship was on fire in the middle of the night. And I remember him describing this huge jump that he made, 300 miles off the coast of Ireland, hit the water, went down a long way, looked up, couldn't see a thing. It was a pitch black night, no moon, nothing at all. Fortunately for him, and clearly for me, long term, he was a good swimmer, and he made his way to the surface and was picked up with seemingly no ill effects from this. He came home for a while. You know, he survived the hypothermia that he had been exposed to, but everything seemed okay, and he saw out the rest of the war. A few incidents in that as well that he'd love to tell us about. And he joined the police when he came home, and he was known as a very straight up, honest Bobby, as it were. Didn't aspire to any great rank. He became a sergeant. Fearless, as I said, brave. Once tackled a guy who was armed with a shotgun, and Dad had no sort of weapon on him. He wouldn't even carry a truncheon, but Dad just went round. This guy was waving it about, and Dad went round to see him, thought he could talk him out of it, made him a cup of tea, and took this shotgun off him, and was commended for it. But he had a breakdown, and he ended up in a local, I'm embarrassed to say, lunatic asylum that I used to bandy the name round in Sussex. If anyone is on the call, you might have heard of a place called Hellingly, and my dad actually ended up in Hellingly, and we think it was PTSD, and we think that riding around on his police bike in the 1960s in the pitch black had effectively brought back that incident of plunging into the darkness, and he'd kept this hidden, and he'd kept it buried. I didn't find this out until long after he died, because he came out, no one spoke about it. It was just not spoken about at all, and my mum didn't share it until long after he died, and even then we didn't talk about it very much as a family. And my reason for sharing that is, one is to talk about my passion for it and the fact that it can affect anyone, but also I deliberately described him physically to you. And on the top left-hand side, we have the mental health spectrum. And one of the things I'm really passionate about is the fact that mental health and physical health do not have parity. As soon as we start talking about physical health, we don't assume that we're going to talk about physical ill health. Whereas as soon as someone starts talking about mental health, we automatically assume we're going to talk about mental ill health. In fact, I'm sure many of you, will have had people say, it's my mental health, and one of the things I think is really, really important if we're going to get to grips with this is teaching our young people and teaching all of us actually about good mental health and what we should do to maintain that good mental health. And on the graph, I think mental wellness and mental disorder probably don't need an awful lot of explanation. We understand those, but I do want to pick out flourishing. Flourishing is brilliant when you're in that phase, but it's not something that you can maintain for a long period of time. It requires a lot of energy to stay in that flourishing phase. And certainly we see it in PwC, but I know it doesn't. It's not only up in the city where this happens. People can put themselves at risk of burnout if they don't accept the fact that they cannot be always on, always flourishing all of the time. It's perfectly okay to move back into that mental wellness. You'll see the term cognacity, or a firm of psychiatrists and psychologists that we work with at PwC. And one of the guys there uses the lovely analogy of a Formula One racing car. It stops during a race in order to go faster. I did actually do a session with McLaren Formula One, and they pointed out for only 3 seconds was what they said. But nevertheless, the point is well made that we all need to rest if we're going to recover. Top class athletes don't expect to be performing their best times, their best jumps, their best throws all throughout the year. They expect to peak at the right moment. And flourishing is something to enjoy, but not to try and unnaturally stay in there because you could burn out. Notice the peak of mental wellness starts to drop off towards languishing, even though it's still within mental wellness. Well, it's perfectly okay to be sad. It's perfectly okay to be anxious. They are normal, healthy human emotions. And I think that's one thing we could all do to explain to our young people better. We do tend to throw terms around very, very easily, not just young people, older people as well. I'm depressed. I've got work tomorrow. We're kind of diminishing what depression is if we're saying that we're sad because we've got work tomorrow. If you're feeling depressed day after, if you're feeling, sad day after day after day after day, then you could be moving through this languishing phase where those emotions, those normal emotions, are difficult to shake off, and you could be moving into mental disorder. One of the things I always stress in the training I do is that it's not about us ever actually. Sorry, I've just realised my phone is ringing. I've just turned that off. It's not for us to diagnose anyone who's having a mental disorder, or they're languishing, or whether they're just having a bad day. The fact is we ought to look out for people and show a bit of care, show a bit of understanding. That's the message that we put across at PwC. I'll pause there, Chris, in case there's any questions from yourself there, or anything from anyone else.
Yeah, I was just gonna. So Cognacity, they're the psychologist. Is that what PwC invest in to make sure just their partners are looked after, or the whole staff, to make sure that everyone can access the sort of conversation you're approaching here?
Yeah, I mean, we are incredibly fortunate. With a firm like PwC, we work with AXA for our private medical healthcare. So we have an employee assistance program number with that people can call. But yes, people can see someone from Cognacity directly, but also we use them to help us with the whole literacy strategy as we've got here, talking to groups of people. We've been running live streams with them throughout the 12 months that we've been under lockdown, so they can actually preemptively talk about some of the concerns, some of the worries that people are having during that time, and what might manifest.
Yeah, okay. And just with teacher hat on here, I was just thinking there, good mental health being spoken about, that's something straight away we can take into the classrooms, isn't it? And just, even if it's not a policy at school yet, we can have that conversation with our classmates, so to speak, couldn't we, about trying to encourage us talking about it positively.
Yeah, and later on in the slides, I do really want to focus on that, about what we can do and what we can tell our young people in that they can do to support their own mental health. I want to just pause, if you like, and I'd really love it if some people could come up with their views, if you like, on the list that I've put up there. So I often do this with a group with a flip chart, get people to write up what are the kind of signs that they're looking out for. I guess while you're having a look at that list, one of the questions is, how easy is it to spot? And working virtually, as I know many of you have had, giving lessons, in that virtual world, that has thrown a whole nother layer of complication there. So how easy is it to spot those signs? But how easy is it to spot those signs in our colleagues as well? And perhaps what should we do as a result? So I'd be really happy if anyone wants to come off mute. Yeah, mood swings, abusive substances, Liz, absolutely right. Interesting there. I don't want to get too bogged down into statistics, but women are way more likely to be diagnosed with an anxiety or a depressive disorder. Men are way more likely to be diagnosed with addictive behavior. And the inference there cannot be proved outright, but the inference there is one I think we probably know. Men don't talk about these things as much, so they're less likely to go and seek that help from a GP and get a diagnosis. They're more likely to self-medicate instead.
Any other suggestions from anyone? But it's interesting looking at this. I could relate this to people in my friendship circle, people at work. So again, it's having the detectors on, isn't it, really? Just by coming out of this, I probably will be more aware.
Yeah, and I think the fact is that we could, I mean, that could just be a busy day for me. I could look at that, and I shouldn't use that terrible word, just, but half of those could just happen on a busy day, that I could get irritated, angry, speaking fast, those kind of things could happen to me without it being any kind of mental health challenge. But the one thing I think we can all do is show care here. You've alluded to it, Chris, and it's, asking, checking out and being aware of other people, and something that so I'm a mental health first aid instructor with Mental Health First Aid England, and we've been using this adage for years, which is ask twice, and I'm really pleased to see that it was something that was promoted. I'm sure a lot of you have seen the Roman Kemp documentary on BBC around mental health, and that's something that he took away from that and promoting it. And the fact is that I don't know what it's like in each of your schools, but we always joke where I work now that if you say to someone, "How are you?" they don't tell you how they are, they tell you they're busy. That's their answer. And so it's like saying fine. And so actually what we've been trying to promote is asking twice. So the follow-up question is good, busy, or too busy? Because busy is good. Work is a protective factor for our mental health. Meaningful, purposeful work is good for us. But too much work, being too busy, could be a challenge. And so just by asking twice, we show that we're being authentic. We're not prying by asking twice. Please don't. I suggest to all of you that you don't turn around to someone and say, "God, you look awful. Are you okay?" That's probably not going to have the best response. But asking, "How are you?" No, really, I mean it. How are you? And if that person says fine, then okay, we leave it, but we make sure that they know that we're available to them, because we may not be the right person as well. We shouldn't be too precious about this, but we might get the brain going and that person might seek help. And I've had an example of that. Someone I spoke to at work, they told me everything was fine. I'd asked twice, And then they came back to see me a couple of months later to tell me that because I'd asked them, they spoke to someone at home as a result, which was just great to hear. It's just reassuring that just by asking, even if you don't get that answer back, you're doing something positive.
And I wonder if teachers have watched that Ronan Kemp BBC documentary. Definitely worth a while. And again, it brings it into the classroom, doesn't it? By someone who people look up to. You know, he's on the radio. People recognise him, and it can bring it into the classroom in a cool and relatable way, which is often what we need to be doing. Jennifer's just said it's about seeing repeating patterns and getting curious. I think that's a great line, isn't it, Sean?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's hard because, you know, how well, you know, in the time, we're often really short for time, isn't it? How much time do we have to get to ask that question, or get to know people well enough? But I think we can all get to know someone a little bit better, and it's those small 1%. And Liz, lovely to see that with that poster campaign that is up in the classroom. I think that's great.
Yeah, I think we've got some good people on who are proactive. I'm conscious of time because there's a lot of slides to get through, but Minya's just said, well, how might you spot these when not seeing someone in person? So yeah, how can you do it if people are online? Tricky, right?
I think it might be a case of thinking outside the box. We can't see what we can't see. You know, we have to admit that we you know, we cannot hold ourselves totally responsible in these situations, but it might be the emails at odd hours. You know, that might be the sign that we see. It could be someone who's been happy to be in on their camera and is not in on their camera. First of all, I know there's some of you probably on this call are going to say, well, my school's got rules about cameras being on and off. I do understand that, but I think that that thinking, sometimes we just need to widen our thinking there. But I don't think you can ever go wrong if it's just asking, how are you, you know, and being prepared to do that. Also, I would say, and I say this to people, is to trust our gut. If something doesn't feel quite right, ask. I went to a talk with a guy called Clark Carlisle, who's, for those of you who don't know, he's an ex-professional footballer who's spoken openly about his mental health. And he gave a wonderful talk. He speaks very articulately alongside his wife. And it was something his wife said that really struck a chord with me, because she said that we know it can be difficult to spot signs, but she said, I didn't realize how good I'd got at ignoring them. And what she meant by that was that she loved Clark so much that she didn't want what she was seeing in front of her eyes to be true. And she used the example that he was sleeping 14 hours a day, which was a fundamental sign of his depression. She was pregnant at the time. And she said, I managed to convince myself that he was saving up sleep for when the baby came. And she said, I look back on that and realize how ridiculous it is, but I just didn't want him to be unwell. And I think we should check ourselves, trust our gut on those things. If something doesn't feel quite right, we're not going to make it worse by saying, is everything okay?
No. Sean, should we press on?
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent.
Only wanted to throw this up and invite any kind of questions at all. There are a range of different mental health conditions out there. The diagnostic statistical model, I think, runs to over 280. By no means are all of them on here. One of the things I should say is that these are on here overlapping deliberately as well, because you know, there are interactions between those. So someone suffering with bipolar disorder may also exhibit signs of psychosis, for instance, as well. Eating disorders are often rooted in anxiety type behaviours as too. So they are overlapping, but I just wanted to throw it open and ask if there was anything up there that people didn't recognise, or if anyone had heard something about and wanted to bust a myth over.
Yeah, do feel free to ask anything on any of these points. If you do understand them all, that'd be fantastic, of course. Yeah. I certainly don't, but it's not for me to ask at the moment.
I'm not going to answer schizophrenia, by the way, because that's a question coming up next.
Okay. Here we go. We got
brilliant. Thank you, Jennifer. That's the one that comes up first. That's generalized anxiety disorder. And it's actually one of the most common forms of anxiety disorder. And it's almost the opposite of a phobia. So if you've got pognophobia, you've got a fear of beards, and you can, you can avoid blokes with beards if you like to manage that fear. But if you've got generalized anxiety disorder, often you don't have a specific focus to it. It's that feeling of unease, disquiet that someone experiences that can be incredibly overwhelming without having that specific focus. I've heard a guy talk about he couldn't leave his house for 6 years because of this crippling anxiety that he had, but he couldn't tell you what it was. He couldn't tell you what he was frightened of. And in fact, he went on to say that during his recovery periods, he couldn't even relate to the person who was experiencing that anxiety. This is way more than someone who's just a little bit worried because they're going into an exam. That's I think that's one of the things we can all be guilty of, overlaying our own anxious moments. As I said, I will have felt anxious before this because I'm talking to a group that I don't know, but I know that that's controllable. I know what I'm expecting. Anxiety disorders is above and beyond.
And it is great to list it here, isn't it? Because it just shows how much is out there, because young people probably just don't know. Then it makes you feel, even if you've got a little bit of something that you might be thinking that's going on, at least it's easy to talk about, as it's not as bad as the bigger examples we might hear.
Yeah, absolutely.
From Liz here saying, if anyone hasn't done the MHFE course, First Aid for Mental Health, it's a must. Schools were offered it free before lockdown, and they're still offering them.
Yeah, I would heartily recommend it. It's brilliant. It's lovely to hear those people who are confident on the call, but I think for all of us, being able to engage with something like that and improve that confidence, because the mantra is effectively it's about spotting signs, and it's asking, and then it's signposting support. But doing that course gives you that real confidence to know that listening is something that is all powerful. I'm going to mention, because I'm aware of time here as well, Chris, and I just want to mention a couple of myths to point out here. OCD, you haven't got OCD if you like the volume control on even numbers of 5 or a 0. Common myth around that. It's very rare, OCD, and it's the thoughts behind the behaviours, not the behaviours themselves. So I always joke about the fact that I like to put my clothes away in a certain order in the wardrobe, colour order, and by garment, that kind of thing. But I'm perfectly happy if I'm in a rush to throw them in there, and then I just enjoy tidying them up afterwards. If I had OCD, I couldn't. If that was my focus, I'd have to put them away, because something terrible might happen to a loved one as a result of me not doing that. So my wife might have an accident on the way to work if I don't do my checks and balances. That's what we're talking about. It's one of the rarest forms of anxiety disorder. And then the other one I'm just going to pick out here is PTSD. Again, probably a bit of a myth buster here. More common in women than it is in men. We tend to think of it as the military and people who work in emergency services. And of course, they see traumatic events. But slightly over 50% of the population are women. And traumatic childbirth is, by very its nature, it's a traumatic event that can trigger PTSD. Sadly, you're also more likely to be a victim of domestic violence or sexual assault if you're a woman as well. So actually, PTSD is significantly more common in women than it is in men. Should we flick on to the quiz, Chris?
I think it's time for a quiz.
Yeah. So I think the easiest way to do this is just throw them in on chat. We'll go through them one by one. So number one, the average period of depression lasts around 4 to 6 weeks. Just a T if you think that's right, or an F if you think it's false.
Average period of depression lasts around 4 to 6 weeks.
We've got falses coming in there, and that's absolutely right. It's 6 to 8 months. Again, comes back to that point I made. You're not depressed if you're feeling sad. It's having those feelings of sadness amongst other symptoms hanging around for an extended period of time. You'd normally have to be experiencing the symptoms for at least 2 weeks before you would get a diagnosis from a doctor. However, I put that in to point out the positive news that 50% of people who experience a depressive episode only have the one. That's it. It's a one-off event. So the idea that once a depressive, always depressive is just simply not true. Again, for those of you who've done mental health first aid, there's a bit of a mantra in there that recovery is not just possible, but probable. What about number 2?
50% of mental health disorders begin under 18 years of age.
Got David in there with
50%.
true. Ali with true. Yeah, we've got a false in there. It is actually false. It's 75%. So it's 50% in under 15s. It's 75% in under 18s, which, again, points to why we're here and why it's really, really important that we do invest in education around mental health and well-being. It's not diagnosed, Liz. Many of you have heard this this figure of 1 in 4 people will experience a mental health challenge in any given year. 1 in 6 of those will be working age adults. It's not diagnosed, but it is an extremely well researched figure based on surveys, over-the-counter medication audits and the like as well. So it's a pretty well researched figure, but yeah, sadly not everyone gets a diagnosis. Many things stand in the way of that. Self-awareness, realizing that you need a diagnosis, stigma that gets in the way, stopping you from getting diagnosed. That's why the message around recovery being probable, not just possible, is really, really important. And of course the resources. We are massively underfunded when it comes to supporting people with mental ill health. As anyone who's tried to get someone to see CAMHS will probably know. What about number 3? False from David there. Symptoms of schizophrenia include split personality and aggression. From Lynn, false. Got a few trues, a few falses. The answer there is false. It's a complete misrepresentation of schizophrenia. Whilst you do get occasional instances where people are sadly attacked, even murdered by people who are suffering from paranoid schizophrenia, they are incredibly, incredibly rare. The last one I know of that was, a bona fide case was the guy who got on the train with his teenage son and bumped shoulders with someone in West London. And he followed the guy down the train, and they got into an argument, and the guy stabbed him, and he was a paranoid, he was suffering from paranoid schizophrenia. That was nearly 3 years ago. It always makes front page news. Sadly, schizophrenia has the highest rate of suicide of all mental health conditions. Around 10% of people suffering from schizophrenia die suddenly, mostly by suicide. They are more likely to be a risk to themselves than they are to the general public. That being said, we should always make sure that we keep ourselves safe. And the split personality one is just totally wrong. Anyone who's a psychology teacher on here will know that. For a start, dissociative identity disorder is what we're talking about with those sort of multiple personalities. When we're talking about schizophrenia, we're talking about psychosis, delusions, hallucinations, disordered thought. What about number 4? Self-harm is a serious mental illness.
Split again.
A few falses. Yeah, a bit of a sneaky one, this one. It's not a mental health condition in itself, but it is, of course, serious. It's a manifestation of a mental health condition. So someone experiencing extreme depression, extreme anxiety, for instance, may resort to self-harm. Self-harm is terribly sort of portrayed, misunderstood in many ways. It's very, very hard for us. Self-harm is a coping mechanism. It's a very unhealthy coping mechanism that we wouldn't want people to engage with. But nevertheless, we've got to get to the root cause of what is causing the self-harm. There's a fantastic person called Satvir Nijar who campaigns. I'll make sure I share that with you, Chris. Actually, I forgot to put that on here. Who campaigns and does talks to schools around what self-harm is and what self-harm isn't, talking about her experience of it. It is an unhealthy coping mechanism. But if it is a coping mechanism that actually manages people's suicidal thoughts, we'd be very, very careful. It's very easy to do as a parent or a teacher to tell someone to stop, but we could have a more serious consequence if we just simply tell someone to stop that activity without getting to the root cause of it. That's why the mental health training that people can do is so useful. You can talk about minimization techniques such as elastic bands around wrists to ping and cause the pain, or holding ice cubes in hands, which don't cause long-lasting pain. But that person needs understanding. They're not just attention seekers. I've got a hand up there, I notice.
See, I'm trying to find it.
Is it?
Is there a hand up?
Maybe not.
Maybe
it's not. No, it's just my one that's gone yellow. Maybe it's me. Yeah, incompetency with IT there. And then the last one there, symptoms of anxiety include palpitations, dizziness, nausea, diarrhea, muscular aches, and chest pain. What do we think on that one? Again, pretty much a split there. The fact is, it's true, and I'm going to mention a lockdown favourite here because it leads on to the next slide really, really nicely. If any of you have watched Ozark on Netflix, fantastic. Only watch one episode at a time. It's quite anxiety inducing in itself. But there's a scene in that where one of the main characters, and don't worry, there's no plot spoiler here in case you want to watch it. One of the main characters says, "Oh my God, I think I'm having a heart attack." And one of the other characters says, "Oh no, don't worry, you're just having a panic attack." Well, one of the things to say there is, in my experience, telling people not to worry never works. I can't think of a time in my life where the simple words of "don't worry" has ever made one jot of difference to the worry that I've been going through. Understanding what I'm going through is what I need. But the fact is that the symptoms of severe anxiety, a panic attack, can be just like a heart attack, and it's actually considered, and if we flick over to the next one, Chris, it's considered to be a mental health crisis. So flick them all up, Chris, so the ones here I think will work for us. And I can give you examples of people. Someone told me of a relative of theirs who'd had a couple of panic attacks and then had a third one that didn't feel quite right at the ripe old age of 27. And the reason why it didn't feel quite the same as their previous panic attacks was because it was actually a heart attack. I've also heard stories of people who've experienced severe heart attacks, severe panic attacks where they've passed out, lost consciousness. Well, it's a no-brainer that you call an ambulance. And other people that have spent several hours in hospital having tests before the doctors could actually ascertain that it was a panic attack and not a heart attack. The doctors, the paramedics, they don't mind. They expect it. I've spoken to some paramedics. They fully understand that it's far better in effect to call an ambulance too early than to ever call one too late. That's the adage that they would use. Other things that might cause a crisis: so severe psychotic behaviour. Yeah, unlikely that someone will be a danger to you, but we've got to keep ourselves safe. But danger to themselves, most definitely. Panic attacks mentioned, and then suicidal risk. I should say for everyone, I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail here around what suicide is and what suicide isn't. There are some useful things that people can look up about what you can do to support someone who talks about suicidal thoughts. One is to actually ask them what they're going through and find out what stage they're at, so that we can then decide whether someone is just having thoughts. And roughly 20% of the UK population will have a suicidal thought in their lifetime. That doesn't transpose to around 6,000 people who die due to suicide. But my point here is, if you are at all worried, it's not the time to be calling for a counsellor if you think someone is at immediate risk. It's the time to call for an ambulance. If someone's having a heart attack, we don't hesitate because we're worried about their life. If someone is talking actively about taking their life, we're worried for their life. So we call an ambulance for them. And we do have, as it said there, a mental health crisis team attached to every accident and emergency unit up and down the UK. And that's normally a car with medically qualified staff and police as well, so that they can invoke sectioning powers should it be necessary.
And that's the same type of training with safeguarding, isn't it? You know who you need to call when, and that's what you get through the training, through the mental health courses. Yeah,
Absolutely.
Which again, like we've already said, you know, I think they are still free out there for teachers to be able to do, aren't they? And what would you say, Sean? Everyone should be doing them, right? Surely.
Yeah. You know, I think, you know, as we'll come on to about what we can do for ourselves as a school, I think getting people skilled up, and there's yes, there are paid courses. I mean, I work through Mental Health First Aid England. They're not free courses, although sometimes through various schemes we can run things you know, for free, or they will be run for free. It is a fantastic course, but I will say anything that you can get on to, you know, check it out, make sure it is someone reputable who's running it, but anything that you can get a staff member onto, you know, it's really important. We wouldn't think twice about having a physical first aider, and that costs money to get physical first aiders trained up. You are more likely to talk to someone who is experiencing suicidal thoughts than you are to meet someone who's suffering a heart attack. And so, you know, stats wise, it's really, really important that we do get our population trained up. Next one then.
Let's go. The stress.
Yeah, and I'll be interested if anyone has come across this. I'm sure there will be people on this call who've come across this this idea of the stress container. Yeah, a couple of yeses there. Brilliant. I really don't like to stray anywhere near the area of giving people advice. You know, it's really yeah, actually brilliant, Ali. I really don't want to, you know, we should never be giving our young people advice. We should be listening to them and signposting towards support. However, as a model, this is a fantastic model to use to sit down with anyone, I would say, you know, of any age. We use it with our staff at work to think about what is the stress that we're experiencing, and to actually, again, educate people on the fact that stress in itself is not a mental health condition. It's not a problem. We can enjoy stress. We put ourselves into stressful situations for the sheer pleasure of it at times, and you know, sometimes not for the sheer pleasure. I'm one for a deadline. I'll leave things till the last minute because I know that the stress of a deadline actually spurs me on to you know, it gets the juices flowing, as it were. But this analogy, you know, that we can use, the fact that we can take on a certain amount of stress, but it's finite. You know, it is finite, and our stress containers are different, and that's a lovely one to share with young people. You know, the fact that we all have a different size stress container. Some people will overfill when it's relatively small. Some people will seem to be able to take it on to a huge level, but the fact is it will still overfill if they don't empty that stress container. And so it's a great positive conversation to have with a young person about what are they doing to relieve stress. And it could be exercise, you know, it could be hobbies, it could be talking with their friends. Nothing is too highbrow or too lowbrow when it comes to it. You know, I often joke at PwC, we have partners who will talk about the fact that they love to learn Latin whilst playing the cello, while picking up little Tommy from his ballet classes. You know, those kind of things. Those are their hobbies that relieve stress. Other people will openly admit that watching Married at First Sight Australia is the thing that does it for them, and that's fine. But also talking about what is good and what can turn into bad. So my son, you know, he loved TikTok at the start of the pandemic. You know, he was watching things on TikTok, getting involved in making those dances and sketches with his sister, you know, the voiceover ones that you can do on TikTok. And then he's turned it off because he's found it unhelpful. And I'm really proud of him, because I think that's great, that self-awareness that he's had, that what started off as a you know, if you like, a de-stressing exercise for him actually was starting to stress him out because he just didn't like some of the messaging that was going on in there. And I think that's great to talk about. And we can talk about those healthy coping mechanisms, the unhealthy ones. I don't think we need anyone to tell people that drinking drugs is unhealthy, but it's good to explore with people why that might happen. I mean, adults sharing a glass of wine or a beer because they're talking isn't a negative. Adults going for a beer because they just want a beer is only ever going to be kicking that stress down the road, isn't it? Effectively, to mix my metaphors completely.
No, it's good. And it's good to see teachers are using this as well, even just something like this up on the wall, and again, just front of mind all the time. I think that's what we've got to be trying to do, isn't it? Discreetly and as much as we can be, without I suppose making it blindingly obvious, because it feels like we're definitely not at that stage yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And then again, next one, just to flick through this quickly, I'm sure many of you saw this. This came out and was shared quite widely on the BBC, particularly at the start of the pandemic. But I've come back to this time and time again to remind staff of their own well-being, but also when looking out for colleagues. And again, not to read it out, but it's the Apple technique here, and the A for acknowledge comes back to that point I made, that telling me not to worry is not acknowledging what I'm going through. And I am just as guilty of doing that to myself. So the Apple technique I like, because actually it's something that we can think about for ourselves, but we can also talk about with someone else, and how we manage that conversation. So acknowledging, I mean, one of the things that's been said, a lot is, first world problem. In the I've missed out on my holiday, but it's a first world problem. Well, yes, okay, we're very, very lucky to have holidays, but we've missed out on them. And we might want to get to that conclusion at the end, but we ought to acknowledge that little bit of grief, if you like, when the date of our holiday has passed and we haven't got on that plane. We should acknowledge that low mood, that frustration, that anger as it is, to allow ourselves to move with it. So I love the acknowledging there. And then the other one, just to mention, is the pulling back. I caught myself doing it earlier and stopped halfway through. We shouldn't be labeling ourselves. So we shouldn't be labeling people as psychotics or depressives. We shouldn't be labeling ourselves as worriers. The fact is that we experience a mental health challenge, and then we look at how we can move through that. It's very, very difficult to do that if that becomes you. If you are a worrier, if you're known as a worrier, how do you recover from that feeling of anxiety? Putting those boundaries in place, pulling back from that is really important. So, another great technique to have a look at. Again, falls short of giving people advice, but it's something that's quite useful to make a conversation around when you're listening to someone. Next slide, please, Chris. Very Chris Whitty again. So in terms of that the positives, and what we can do to talk to our young people about, if you like, protecting themselves, the New Economics Foundation and Public Health England came up with the 5 ways to well-being. Some of you may be aware of the 10 keys to happier living, spelt as Great Dream. Yeah, thanks, Chris. These are the 5 core parts of those 10 keys to happier living, and I've found, certainly at where I work, and we've talked with some schools around this as well, people have resonated really well in terms of active things that people can do. Taking notice, mindfulness, can be meditation, can be just taking time out, switching off the phone, sitting, staring out of a window, going for a walk without having your earphones in, those kind of things that we can encourage people to do. Doing nothing isn't always time wasted. We need to switch off. Connecting, we should never have called it social distancing in my book. It should have been physical distancing, because we've needed to connect with each other more and more, but actually consider the quality of those connections as well. So, some of our connections are not helpful. Those can be social media connections. Sometimes it can be with our friends. We've got better friends to talk to, better friends to play around with, if you like. So thinking about the quality of those connections. Being active, I think the argument is won. really, for exercise being good for the body and good for the mind. However, we do get pretty competitive over these kind of things. Adults and kids can feel that, you know, if you're not running a half marathon, then you're not getting the best out of it. Walking that dog, just walking around the block, having a chat with a friend, as we're allowed to do, could be incredibly supportive, and getting that regularly into people's, if you like, toolbox of daily maintenance tips. Keeping learning a new skill, and then giving time and support to other people as well. And that could just be phoning that friend and checking in on them, makes us feel better. Sorry, Chris.
And then I was going to say, it's quite tricky, isn't it? Because something that always helps me de-stress is sport as an ex-PE teacher. And what I've found sometimes I've done in my life with, you know, loved ones, etc., is put what works for me onto them. How can you sort of advise us on how not to potentially do something that works really well for you and actually open up a little bit more? Because it might be, you say, go for a run, it'll make you feel much better, but actually it doesn't help the problem at all. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it's you've kind of summed it up. If you're thinking along those ways, you're doing it the right way. And there is nothing wrong with saying, look, I found for me that this has worked for me in the past, but I'm not you. Is there anything that works for you? You know, do you go out for a walk with people? Do you have a dog, a pet at home? You know, what are those things? We've got to throw it open. It's the old adage of 2 ears, 1 mouth, isn't it? Really, I mean, the example you gave is a great one. It's the trap we can fall into. You know, I know exactly what you're going through. We do not know exactly what someone else is going through. I could be talking to someone. So I lost my dad at 21. I was talking to someone at work who lost their dad at 21. I didn't even tell them. I didn't even go there, because completely different relationship that I will have had with my father than they've got with theirs. And so it's really important that we remember that. But actually saying, you know, these are 5 pillars I know that really, really work, proven time and time again to support people. How can you tap into these? The other thing there is it gives that person ownership of their recovery as well. You know, just simply telling people what to do doesn't get them involved. And we know that holistic view on recovery is much, much more effective. That person feels like they are part of their support, their recovery. And again, I should say, we're not talking about recovery here. We're talking about maintenance, but it's part of it as well.
And what about being stuck in a rut as well? Because maybe one of these 5 could help us change our pathway a little bit. I mean, I'm just thinking here, all the things you can do in school. Maybe you know that young person and you know they're not using everything that they could do. Surely, like whether it's give or whether it's take notice or connect, you can all do that within the school environment and ask the question to see, like, what about mixing it up a little bit if you know they're stuck in that rut, so to speak. Is that a thing? Am I talking any sense there?
Yeah, I mean, that's the keeping learning, isn't it? It's the trying something new. And it sounds odd, doesn't it, in a school background that we'd be talking about that, but actually, you know, for many kids it's, you know, there's a conveyor belt that they're on almost towards these exams that they've got coming up, and they don't feel necessarily that they've got control, you know, especially if, you know, there's a lot of pressure on the schools, but often there's parents putting a lot of pressure on those individuals as well, and it can feel they haven't got ownership. But getting involved, trying something else out, you know, a change is as good as a rest is the old cliche, isn't it? And I think it's very apt.
Excellent. Just conscious of time, Sean, should we skip to the next one?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do thank you all for listening. I will go through these, and it was great to hear that so many of you have got an on-site counsellor. I can remember back in 2006 in the school that I was in, when we tabled this thing in an SLT meeting, whether we would get a counsellor in for half a day and whether we would need them. And that grew very, very, very quickly into 2 counsellors, one full-time, one part-time, in a matter of a couple of years. And if we can invest in it, it's incredibly helpful. One thing, these are things that I thought would work. These are kind of things that we've done at PwC, but I think are transposable. Buy-in from the top. So we are very open at talking about mental health at PwC, and that's improving, if we like, people accessing that support. And buy-in from the top has been something that's been really crucial for that. You kind of have to have the top down and the boots on the ground approach here. And so, you know, mental health champions, wellbeing champions, whatever you want to call them, advocates, who are there for all of you to consider in your schools, but perhaps people sharing their stories. We love a story at PwC, we really do, and we've had partners talking openly about quite severe mental health issues to the firm as a whole, and it's been received so well and has really opened up that dialogue. We have a campaign. Yeah, we'll answer that one from Munya. We've had a campaign that we run every May called Green Light to Talk as part of Mental Health Awareness Week, coming up 10th to the 14th of May. That listening training for all staff, one of the things I'm going to suggest to you all is if you go to the Samaritans website and type in Wellbeing in the Workplace, there are some free modules. We actually worked with the Samaritans on this. They were a long-time charity partner with us, and we worked on with those. You have to sign up for them, but they are free online modules that people can get involved in. I think that would be, if I give one useful link to you all, that's one there for you. We've already talked about the mental health first aid training. I think getting people trained in mental health first aid, at least one person in the staff, is important. They can be there as a responder, but it's great with the whole mental health awareness all year round, it has to be said. And then I guess throwing open that question as well, as we start to get these resources that are available, there are free versions of Headspace, for instance, or Calm, those mindful meditation apps, and finding a space on your virtual learning platform. I'm probably well out of date with calling it that at the here, but finding a space where you could share some resources, safe resources, if you like, that pupils can go to download to support themselves. I'm sure many of you have already done that.
Brilliant. And as we just draw to a close, just want to any opportunity for questions. But Munya has just asked, what can colleagues in school do to support staff? Because some people were saying that teachers are most at risk, really, as opposed to students almost. Perhaps those examples done in business that can be replicated, adapted in education. It's easy to set up fantastic provision for students, but who looks after staff, leadership team included?
Yeah, I think my feeling here, Munya, is that actually what I'm talking about here is applicable. If you're going to have a mental health strategy for your school, it's for your school. And I think that if we're going to train staff to be better listeners, yes, they can be better listeners to the pupils, but they can also be better listeners to those staff. The mental health first aiders that you've got, I think it should be clear there's adult mental health first aid, there's youth mental health first aid. We do need to look after them. Let's face it, again, an often repeated analogy here, you put the oxygen mask on yourself before you put it on anyone else. And so we need to be looking after our staff members if they are going to look after our pupils. That's lovely to see there, Liz. That mental health and wellbeing policy.
Just saying, we have a mental health and wellbeing policy. I wonder if anyone else does, or maybe if you feel like that there's a gap there. But you're absolutely right. Everything we've been talking about today reflected students and indeed teachers. It's the same thing. The bucket could be up in the staff room, couldn't it? And we've all got line managers to look after us, or governors.
Yeah, definitely. That listening part, and I know we've run over time, and I'm sure some people want to drop off, but I'm quite comfortable to stay here, Chris, for a few minutes more if anyone does have any questions. But
Sure.
In all of the work that I've done, if we can train people to be better listeners, we will greatly improve. I mean, we spend inordinate numbers of years on learning how to read and write, and yet the actual amount of time we spend communicating through reading and writing is way smaller than it's estimated. We spend 40% of our communication time listening, and yet we don't do an awful lot of training around listening. For pupils in school don't learn how to listen actively very much, nowhere near as much as they learn those other forms of communication. So if we can improve the listening skills of people, I think that's the one almost seems too simple a step, but it's a giant step really in improving, because it's on that road to recovery. It's that first conversation that someone's had where they felt properly listened to has been the start of that recovery for them. Chris, you're on mute.
Yeah, just saw that. I just wanted to ask the teachers if you've got any opinions of what needs to be improved, whether it's government or whether it's in your own school or college. It's something we're going to be picking up with the Careers and Enterprise Company, big companies like PwC who have got influence. Liz and Jennifer, great contributions. Jennifer's just said, look at opportunities to engage everyone in the school community, e.g. training, exits for governors from local enterprise authorities.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that everyone can be involved here. I'm a member of a there we go. I'm a member of a rugby club, and we're going to make sure that we train a few parents, we train some of the coaches in mental health first aid, so that we've got to get it out there in the community as a whole. So starting with your local educational authority sounds just absolutely right.
And just for those of you, we will just finish. It's great that you're still on board, though, everybody. And do let us know in the chat box how this session's been for you. If it's been of use, it's definitely been of use for me, I would say. But if you are new to the Pathway Programme, you can sign up and get access free for all your students. They can do our survey and find out all about the opportunities that we have with different brands. And by the way, we do that, whether it's HSBC, the Financial Times, the Co-op, we do encourage them to talk about diversity and inclusion, but also important things that are important to them, such as mental health. And people ask them to talk about it more. Sean, we've got a profile section for companies that we work with. And when we're starting to speak to companies now, they want young people to know that they're a green eco company because they care about the environment, but also that they're socially diverse, multicultural, but also mental health does come into it because kids care about it.
Absolutely. We have that. We recognise it. Look, we do the work that we do at PwC because it's the right thing to do. We're always adamant about that. We don't sell anything. We don't build anything. It's basically people that is our resource, and we need to look after our people. And there's a report from a company called Deloitte. I don't normally like to say that name because they're one of our rivals, but they released a report which was making the case for investment in mental health, and they estimate that the cost to UK businesses is £45 billion a year through poor mental health. Much of that down to presenteeism, not absenteeism. But there's a return on investment of £5 for every £1 spent. So firms that invest, and our young people want to know that. And we're looking at the work that we do, where it goes. It's fine for us to be looking after the mental health of our staff, but what about when they work with our clients? Who's looking out for the clients as well? How's that impacting them? And we should be very, very mindful of our own mental health first, and foremost. We need to look after ourselves, but we need to be looking at how we impact other people, and firms like us are cottoning on to that.
No, excellent, Sean. Just a final comment, a few comments. Munya said, thanks so much, Chris and Sean. Fantastic. Enjoy your bike ride, Sean, and be safe. Yeah. David, many thanks for this. Really clear advice and ideas. Liz, who's been a great contributor. I have a Wellbeing Teams channel and regularly put stuff on it for staff and students. Also, one assembly every half term. Liz, we'll drop you an email and find out more and maybe get you sharing some of those, because it sounds like you're absolutely on it in terms of where you need to be for your school and your teachers and young people. Jennifer, thank you very much. Always so useful and important to have the chance to engage around mental health topics. Alex, thank you, gents. Very informative and clear. Liz, thank you. Excellent session. Thank you so much. Very interesting. So great feedback there, Sean. Thank you so much for your time. Any final comments?
No, just really brilliant. It was it's really reassuring, as I said, to see that poll at the start. And I do apologise because some of you clearly have got something going in your schools that seems pretty well progressed. So apologies if you're hearing more of the same, but hopefully a kind of a reinforcement that you're moving in that right direction. But really, it's really great to hear that people are feeling more confident, getting more knowledge, know what they need to do. I just think, for me, the no-brainer is that we have to have this joined up so that is equal, if you like, right across schools, or there is a framework that sits of consistency right across all schools.
No, excellent. Well, Sean, thanks so much for your time, and thanks so much for the teachers for getting involved. This webinar will be recorded, pushed out to different schools all around the country through the Careers and Enterprise Company. So hopefully if you're watching this recording, it's been useful for you too. But well done for spending the time on it. It's important, I think, that we all do. So Sean, thanks again from us at Pathway CTM.
No problem. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye now.